Welcome to my YouTube channel. Make sure to like, subscribe and share this video. In the last video, we saw an overview of what a computer is. We began with the definition of a computer, then we went ahead to talk about the components of a computer, and lastly we talked about the mouse. As a recall, we said a computer is made up of two principal components, which are the hardware and the software. We further said for better understanding, the hardware components will be divided into three categories, which are the input devices, the processing devices, and lastly, the output device. We went ahead and talked about the input device as the first, and in this video, we shall talk about the processing devices as the second. When a computer receives data from an input device, e.g. a keyboard, the data goes through an intermediate stage before it is sent to an output device, for example, a monitor. In the diagram below, the CPU is the processing device. This is because the CPU converts the data imputed through the microphone into information which is stored in an output device. In this case, the output device is the hard drive. We can therefore say a processing device is any device in a computer that interprets and manipulates incoming data. After processing the data, it becomes information. Therefore, we can say information is processed data. The most common processing devices in a computer include the CPU, the graphics card, the RAM, the motherboard, network card, sound card. It is imperative to note that the CPU is also called the central processing unit, or better still, the processor. The graphics card is also called the GPU, or the graphics processing unit. The RAM is also known as the random access memory. The network card is also known as the NIC, or better still, the network interface card. We shall therefore take each of these processing devices and discuss more about them. But first, we shall talk about the CPU. Then, after discussing the CPU, we shall take the motherboard as the second. After that, we shall talk about the GPU as the third. But first, what is a CPU? The central processing unit handles all instructions it receives from hardware and software running on the computer. The CPU does things. It has very low data storage and it is volatile. The CPU is commonly referred to as the brains of the computer. The CPU is made up of the control unit, the arithmetic logical unit, and the register. The control unit manages and controls all units in the computer, obtains instructions from the memory, interprets them, and directs the operations of the computer. The ALU is a digital circuit used to perform arithmetic and logical operations. It is the fundamental building block of the CPU. The register is where the CPU holds all the data and programs that it is currently using. B. The motherboard. It is a wide and spread socket board where all the other components are plugged into. Despite the fact that it is relatively cheap, it is one of the most important components in a computer. C. The memory. The memory is made up of the primary memory and the secondary memory. The primary memory is further divided into the RAM and the ROM. The secondary memory is further divided into the magnetic memory and the optical memory. As we go ahead, we shall discuss each of these components detailedly. But first, let us talk about the memory relatively to the hard drive. The RAM and the hard drive have a very unique relationship. That is why most often people always get confused about them. Your hard drive is where all your information is stored, And when your computer says you are running out of space, it means your hard drive is almost full or even full. Therefore, all your programs, your files, your folders are all stored in the hard drive. This storage device is non-volatile. The hard drive is slow to access information. Because most hard drives are made of spinning disks, they won't give you information to run some programs because it is slow. That is where now the RAM now comes into play. The RAM stores the same kind of information like the hard drive, but it has a smaller storage space and files stored here are quickly accessed. The RAM is volatile in memory. Volatile means it can store data for a long period of time, and information stored in it is quickly and easily lost if there is a power failure. So if in your RAM you have, for example, you have loaded some programs inside and you want to run it and lights automatically goes out, you discover that you are going to lose all that information. Typically, if your computer has 1,000 gigabytes of space, it is likely to get about 16 gigabytes of RAM. So the hard drive is where you put the stuffs you own but are not currently using. The RAM is where you put the stuffs you are currently using and you need to get in and out of it quickly. When your program, if you run a program, your computer identifies what part of the data you need. It pulls them out from the hard drives and then stores them in the RAM for quick access. This is why when you start a program, for example Zuma, it has to load. So it's loading the program files from the hard drive to the RAM. We can therefore say the RAM is where you run more programs, while the hard drive allows you to install more programs. It also allows you to store more videos, pictures, and you can name the rest. And finally, we are going to talk about the graphics card. After processing all the data, combining the ones and the zeros, the most complex part now lies in displaying the information. Note that the motherboard can still help display without the graphics card, but the quality will be very, very poor. Therefore, we can say the graphics card is like a computer in itself. If you are playing a game with a lot of angles and colors, the computer creates the world, and it does so with data that has been stored in the RAM, which was loaded out of the hard drive, but it is your graphics card that figures out what it is supposed to look like based on where you are standing in the world.